Introducing the world's fastest handheld microgreen seeder, the Little Green Seeding Machine. Seed up to 300 trays per hour with ease. That's up to 4 times faster than hand seeding, giving you more time to live the life you want. Whether that means growing your business or spending time with family and friends. But it's not just speed. The Little Green Seeding Machine ensures even and precise seeding, reducing disease risk and increasing your yields. Spend less time worrying about your crops and more time enjoying the results of healthier, fuller microgreens. Designed to work with nearly every microgreen variety. Its ergonomic design takes the strain off your body so you can say goodbye to long, exhausting hours of hand seeding. Ready to take back your time and boost your income? Click the link below and start growing smarter.
Welcome to the Microgreens Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Krochmalnek. Together, we'll explore the art of turning tiny seeds into a thriving microgreens empire, sharing insights, coveted secrets, and strategic wisdom from building one of Canada's largest microgreens farms. Stay tuned for thought-provoking conversations with leading figures in the world of microgreens.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. My name is Jonah, and I founded one of Canada's largest microgreens farms, growing over 250,000 trays of microgreens in my farming career. And I'm on a mission to help growers and farmers grow more food with less resources and make their farms lean, mean profit machines. On today's AMA, we're going to touch on how to set your microgreens apart in a competitive market, budgeting strategies to keep cash flow steady throughout the year, how to decide what microgreen varieties to grow commercially, and so much more. Let's get right into it. So the first question is, how do you set yourself apart in a competitive market when quality and freshness are comparable? So this is a really good question. There's really 3 ways to differentiate your product or your brand or your microgreens pretty much, which is number 1 is price. Number 2 is the actual quality of the product. So that's where this question comes in. And then the third is service. So having really high quality service in terms of dealing with your customers, whether that's direct to consumer or distributors or restaurants or grocery stores. They all have a little bit different approach to what service is needed to be considered high quality service. But pretty much if you see that you have no ability to increase the quality of your product and everyone else in your market has a similar quality product, which generally speaking, I don't know if I necessarily would subscribe to that, because there's always ways to improve quality. It's just a matter of getting the right information, education, and experience growing microgreens to increase the quality. Because in my experience, I've seen like vastly different qualities from one grower to the other in the same market. And generally speaking, is 1 or 2 leaders in a given area from what I've seen in terms of quality. But that's only one way to distinguish yourself. So price is the most obvious one. It's very logical and very tangible, is that you can compete on price. So if everyone else is selling their clamshells at $6.99, you can sell yours for $6.49 or $5.99 or whatever it may be to have an advantage there. And then the other one is service. So in terms of service, it might mean going the extra mile with delivery to accommodate your customers. It may mean prioritizing your customers and having extra products so that if a restaurant is last minute and needs some product for some event or something, it's doable. So it's, I think, a really important to consider that it's like you want to ideally have all 3 be better than your competitors, and that's the ideal situation. But of course, that's quite difficult to do. But with microgreens in particular, I don't always recommend competing on price unless you're trying to go after distributors and very large volume of products. So that kind of leaves it down to quality and service. So if you think that you can't improve your quality of your product, or the shelf life or anything like that, or the actual taste of the product, then service would be where you want to compete. So hope that gives you some clarity there. Now, of course, there's, I could spend an hour just on that question, but these are kind of more fast-paced questions. So I'll keep going here. Next question is, what kind of packaging works best to keep microgreens fresh while also appealing to customers? So I guess there's two parts to that question, which are what's your market? So if you're selling to end consumers, then the packaging is really important because it's going to often determine if they buy the product or not, as crazy as that may sound. When you go to a grocery store and you see a beautiful packaging, generally speaking, if you never bought that product before, you're more likely to buy that product. So it may not give you repeat business if your actual quality of microgreens is not good, but it will get people in the door, metaphorically speaking, and buy the product for the first time. And then the product quality is what keeps them coming back. So packaging is important. And packaging is two things. There's one is the label itself, and then two is the actual clamshell you're using. So I've seen some farms use those, like even Aero Farms, I believe, uses like really thin clamshell, so it looks like there's more product. So there's a reason they're doing that. You might think, oh, that's deceiving, and it's up to interpretation. But what they're trying to do is give a bigger surface area on the shelf so that it looks like you're getting more product. So that's like a clamshell decision, but there's also, the freshness. So that may not be the best packaging for freshness potentially. I'm not saying it isn't, but in my experience, having a stronger, more durable plastic clamshell that has ridges along the edge, which wicks moisture away, generally has the best shelf life. And then, some people use those moisture pads that soak up moisture from the microgreens. They will help, but if you have a high quality product, in my opinion, they're not really necessary. Now, in terms of actual labeling, so a lot of people start off with just like paper print at home labels, which is totally fine for restaurants and going into the food service, because chefs honestly don't really care, in my experience, on what the packaging looks like. They care about the quality of the product, the price, and the service you can offer them. Whereas, like I said before, end consumers really do care about what the packaging looks like. So it's worth it to invest the time and money to get a graphic designer to make you a nice looking label. And, I think Living Earth Farms labels are great. Giant Gorilla Greens also has great labels. There's a few other that I can't think of on the top of my head, but Instagram and looking at some of the farms that you aspire to potentially be one day. And if you like their packaging, send those to a graphic designer and be like, can you make something similar to this that will stand out, that's uniquely, my brand? And that's generally the best way I've found to create a label that looks really good, is aesthetically pleasing, and will get, customers to try the product. Also having, bright and appealing colors without it being like too, for example, there's with green as a label, there's like, you can have like highlight lime green, which generally doesn't look very good. And then you can have a dark green, which doesn't really stand out. So if you find like a nice bright green that isn't too highlight color, maybe like a pastel more so color, that could work really well. And then you have like a rainbow of those colors on the shelf with the different products you have. That's the approach that I took with Living Earth that seemed to work pretty well and got people to try the product without honestly much marketing. Next question is, what metrics do you recommend tracking regularly to evaluate the health of a microgreens business? This is another great question. I think there are different metrics depending on how you're looking at your business. So if you're just looking at it from a pure like business money perspective, of course, profitability, meaning the profit margin that you make on each product, is important to understand. So not just the total profit margin, which is a great metric as well, but knowing what your profit margin is on each and every product you sell, because you may be surprised that some are significantly higher profit margin than others. And to know and track that information is super valuable in the long run, because, if you have, let's say you have a customer that's potentially wants to buy 100 clamshells of red vein sorrel, and that's going to eat up a lot of your production space, per week sort of thing. Then at least if you have that information, you can make educated and informed decision if that's a good product to push that kind of volume in. As an example, sometimes you may want to use a product as something called a loss leader, which may not be super profitable to sell, but it's going to lead you to more business with that customer. So, if someone's like, hey, I want 5 clamshells of red vein sorrel, and that's a pretty low margin product for you, but they also want, 25 clamshells of pea shoots and 10 clamshells of a crunchy mix and et cetera, then, while you may not be making that much, it's not a huge part of that customer. So you're still making a lot on those other products. But the red vein sorrel, which is a really in demand and beautiful product, may lead them to actually choose your farm instead of other farms to be their supplier. So it's really important to have those individual metrics to make sure that you're making educated and informed decisions. The best way I know to do that is on our website. We have a cost calculator, which you can download. There's a metric, an imperial version, and you can keep track of your profit margin, including all the labor costs, all the packaging, electricity, your delivery costs, like everything that goes into selling and producing these microgreens, you can keep track of. And then over time, you can have multiple spreadsheets that can track your costs based on what's changed over time, which makes it really easy to decide how much to raise your prices when the time comes, which I generally recommend doing it once a year or every 6 months, depending on how kind of prices are changing in the market. Another great metric to use is, which is less, I don't want to say tangible, but it's less like, business focused and more lifestyle focused, is how many hours are you spending on or in the business? So, let's say you're growing, let's say 300 trays a week and you're working 50 hours a week on your business. How are you going to scale up to do 600, 1200, 2000 trays if that's, in the cards for you and that's something you want to do in the future? Ideally, you don't want that number to go up beyond what your comfort level is. And this is where automation, efficiency, hiring staff come into play. So it's really important that as you scale, how you're going to have a plan to make sure that you're not working like crazy hours and burning yourself out. So that's a really important metric that I don't think a lot of people really think about when you think of evaluating the health of a microgreens business. But I've said this so many times that it might be a broken record, but the number one reason that burnout happens is, just being overworked, not having a plan in place on how to efficiently and effectively scale a microgreens business, because they are relatively easy to start, but quite difficult to scale without the automation and efficiency. And then, of course, all the trials and tribulations that come with hiring staff. Maybe when the Tesla robot comes out, it'll be a different situation. But for now, microgreens farms and most businesses rely on manual human labor to work. So it's really important that you have a plan in place. And then I'd say the last one, which kind of ties into that lifestyle where people don't really think about as well, is how much are you enjoying the process of running the business? Now, this is not really tangible. It's not like you can determine the profit margin of a business pretty easily. You just put all the numbers in a spreadsheet and it gives you an answer. Whereas this is a lot more of a mindset and just like what your actual passions are in life. So, running a microgreens business, there's going to be a lot of administrative stuff that you may not want to do, but overall, how much are you enjoying the process of running the business? And what are the things you can do to change over time to improve the enjoyment? So let's say you hate accounting. You just really hate accounting, or you really hate washing trays. What's the way to fix those things? You can hire someone, to wash trays, or you can buy the bootstrap tray washer as an example, and make that process much more enjoyable. So I think those are metrics that people don't really think about, but I think are really, really important. The reason you're running a business like this is, yes, you're passionate about growing microgreens and growing food, but also because you don't want to work a 9 to 5 and do something that you don't enjoy. So it's important that you track those type of metrics on how much you're actually enjoying the process of running a business, and then thinking about how can you improve that over time. And I think it makes such a big difference to think about these things rather than just going with the flow, doing the same thing every day. Look, I've been there in situations where I did not want to be going through this issue with a customer as an example. How can I better ensure that we pick better customers as the business to ensure these issues don't happen in the future, as an example, and that will enjoy the improvement. That will improve the enjoyment of running your business, which is really important if it's something you want to do as a career for the long run. So yeah, hope that helps. Next question is, what budgeting strategies help keep cash flow steady during seasonal fluctuations in demand? So I would say it's always good to keep a buffer obviously in your cash flow. So for example, if you're going through an expansion, and you estimate costs to be, let's say, $100,000 to expand the business, you don't want to only have $100,000 available. You want to make sure you have significantly more than that. There's lots of times that businesses can go out of business of operating because of cash flow issues, meaning that they may have a good business model, but they just run out of cash. So if you run out of cash and you don't have enough credit, if you can't buy soil, as an example, how are you going to grow microgreens? If you can't buy seed, how are you going to grow microgreens? So it's really important to, as accurately as you can, budget, but at the same time, always have a stopgap in case you lose a customer, or in this case, this person was asking about seasonal fluctuations of demand. So you want to have a buffer in cash, and this doesn't necessarily have to be like you have cash stacked away in the bank. It could be you have a line of credit for the business, which is often a much more reasonable thing to do, because if you're growing a business, you're generally going to keep reinvesting that money and or paying yourself. So you don't necessarily want to have a ton of money just sitting there in the business doing nothing. It's much better to deploy that capital in some capacity or pay yourself. But you can do just having cash on hand, or you can just make sure you have a line of credit available. That's like, if for some reason, some unusual situation happens, let's say COVID, and God forbid another COVID happens, how are you going to handle this change in demand and cash flow based on paying your rent, paying your employees, if you have any, and ideally paying yourself still. So having some sort of line of credit is a pretty easy way to do that. And in terms of actually keeping cash flow steady during seasonal fluctuations, getting back to the original question, I think a good strategy I've found is to have a mix of grocery store / direct to consumer and restaurant / food service customers. So every area is going to be different. So for example, if you're in a ski town, you're going to have two peak demands. You're going to have summer peak demand, and you're going to have winter ski, snowboarding kind of demand. Most places aren't like that. Most places have one peak seasonal demand, usually in the summer, unless you're in like Florida or somewhere that a lot of people travel in the winter months. So for example, where I am in Toronto, which is a northern climate, the tourist season is in the summer. So restaurants are busier in the summer. So we have higher demand for product from restaurants in the summer. And then in the winter, grocery stores are busier because there's just not much local product available, if any. So all the product comes from far away. The quality is not very good. People at grocery stores are more likely to buy microgreens because there's not much else available to meet that local demand for salad greens in their or herbs in their market. So when you combine those two strategically, then you kind of can balance the demand. And you can figure that out over time, is like, how much does the demand peak for restaurants? How much does it peak for grocery stores? And how can I balance that best to maximize my space? So by doing that, you'll pretty much help keep cash flow more steady because you're going to have an influx during one season from one type of customer, and then an influx from the other type, which should help balance itself out to keep cash flow steady. What trends do you see in the microgreens industry that growers should prepare for? So yeah, I pretty much covered this on the last podcast episode, so I'll just go through it really briefly. If you haven't checked that out, one of the most recent episodes was like trends and predictions for 2025 for the microgreens industry, and I delve into this in more detail. But pretty much some of the common trends I see is, one, just the industry growing as a whole. So the microgreens industry is over the last decade has grown substantially, and I foresee that continuing in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But I think there's going to be some shifts in where we see production lie. So I think there's going to still be the growth in restaurants, grocery stores. I think it's going to keep continuing, but I think there's going to be this subsegment and new subsegments be created. The subsegment I'm specifically referring to is the supplement market. So whether that's the dried greens for smoothies, or pretty much the equivalent of AG1 powders, but with microgreens, which is like next level nutrition levels compared to something like AG1. That's an opportunity. And I think even more so is capsulated microgreen powders that people can just take like a supplement and get the health benefits. And this applies to way more people than fresh microgreens, because there's a huge supplement market in the US and Canada and across the world that people want to improve their health, but don't necessarily want to eat the healthiest food. So this is like a shortcut that people can take where they can get some of the benefits of microgreens without having to have fresh product on hand and consume it and figure out how to cook it and or add it to dishes, that sort of thing. So that's the first thing. Second, I see more and more customers on the mid-scale size requiring food safety certifications. So if you are looking in the next few years to sell to larger customers, whether that's distributors or grocery store chains, I think more and more of them are requiring some sort of GAP, HACCP, and some sort of food safety certification. I think that will increase over time as microgreens become more popular. People will, the industry will require more of that. This is not to I wouldn't worry about it, but if you are targeting those type of customers, restaurant chains, grocery chains, distributors, it is a good idea to start planning how you're going to be able to get GAP certified for that. And then the last trend I see is the microgreens industry is starting to mature, meaning that there's more and more big players coming into the market because they see the opportunity. And with that, there's going to be more and more automation implemented, which means that if you're a farm that is kind of doing everything manually, it's going to be very hard to compete. And this is something that's going to trend over the next 2, 3, 4, even 5 years, where more and more solutions are going to be created, like the little green seed machine, like the bootstrap tray washer, like automated watering systems that are scalable and cost effective. The farms that don't utilize these tools will have a tougher time competing. Now, if you're growing like 20 trays and you're just starting out, obviously it doesn't make sense to implement these things. It has to make sense for your operation. But if your goal is to compete and grow the business to be a long-term career and investment opportunity and a profitable venture to get into, those tools will become more and more important, because I'm seeing more and more of them be created and then more of them be implemented with farms. So it's going to be really difficult if you're a farm that's just starting out and trying to compete on price. In the long run, it's going to be tough without those automation tools. And then they also make your life a lot easier. So they generally just make sense to implement in farms. But I think that's a trend that you're going to see start becoming more of a challenge for brand new farms starting out. In terms of quality, in terms of actual cost of production. Now, there's certain advantages you have when you're just starting out, which is like you have no rent because you're growing in your house. You have no employees because you're doing everything yourself. But as you scale and you start hiring people, you start realizing what the actual cost is, and it makes a lot more sense to calculate those costs early on, which goes back to the cost calculator, where you can figure out how much different things take you to do. And then you can get an accurate picture of, if you hired someone, what are your margins going to be, which I think is really, really important to understand as an owner of a business. Next question, how do you decide which new microgreen varieties to experiment with, and what's the best way to test them on a smaller scale? This is another great question. So the first thing you want to do before even experimenting with like varieties to grow is find out what is in demand in your area. So to try to learn to grow Chervil as an example, but there's no demand in your market for Chervil, is not a very efficient use of your time from a business perspective. If you want to grow Chervil for yourself, by all means, experiment. I think growing microgreens as like a hobby or even just experimenting with varieties is really fun. It's one of my favorite things, in starting up a microgreens business. But just from a pure like business, what makes the most sense? Figure out from your customers what they don't have that they want, and or what's in demand across the board. So let's say you want to grow arugula, and you go to all your customers and be like, hey, if we grew arugula, would that be something you'd be interested in buying? And like the majority or half of them say yes or something, then it's a clear signal that arugula makes sense to experiment growing with. So that's the best way, because like there's no point in growing varieties that have no demand. That's just, it's, for a hobby, it's fine. But from a business perspective, it's just not an efficient use of time. And then in terms of testing them, what I always recommend is testing different seeding rates and different days to maturity. So you can find like different guides, different companies have different guides. Generally, I find most of them, if they're from seed companies in particular, they have an incentive for you to plant more seed because, then they sell more seed. So just keep that in mind that, not all the guides are what I've seen works the best. But it's a great starting point. And then maybe you do a few grams more, a few grams less, see what works best. If it says, if you see a guide says recommending 10 days and you want to try growing it for 8 days and try growing it for 12 days, and then just have like a bunch of different trays together. And that's how I generally find the best way to test them on a smaller scale. It's a lot easier in some ways with tools like the Little Green Seeding Machine because you can accurately get even seeding rate on the tray. Whereas if you're doing it by hand, if you seed one tray, like you have one tray of each seeding rate or two trays, let's say, they're not evenly spread, it's going to skew your results. So it's better to try to do it as accurately as possible if you're going to do it by hand or use a tool that will allow you to get an even seeding rate. And same thing with the soil. Like if you're mixing by hand, just be extra careful to mix the fertilizer in well so there's no patches of too much or too little fertilizer because that'll skew your results as well. Last question is, what are some ways to boost nutrient density in microgreens and does it impact taste? Yes, 100%. It does impact taste. I've noticed, so there's two things. There's, if you have no fertilizer in your soil, which a surprising number of people grow that because just the old methodology of growing microgreens, that's how it was taught, which I think is at this point quite outdated. So, you're going to have lower nutrition. It's the same thing. If you eat junk food, your body is consuming junk food and is made of junk food. So, the amount of nutrients versus like calories, the balance is pretty off. So it's the same thing. If you're using like synthetic chemical fertilizers, that's better than not having any fertilizer. But if you had the choice between synthetic chemical fertilizers and a good high quality organic fertilizer, you're going to have a much healthier crop. It's going to have better shelf life. The nutrient density is going to be higher because, NPK fertilizers, the chemical fertilizers generally only have like 11 to 15, 14 or 15, something like that, nutrients in because that's the ones that plants need. But there's a lot more nutrients that plants absorb that we need as humans that the plants may not need, but they still absorb and then we absorb through them. So you definitely get higher nutrient density from growing with a high quality organic fertilizer and soil. And the second part is, does it impact taste? It does. And it's not as simple or as linear as you may expect. So in my experience with microgreens, if you have no fertilizer, the flavor is often quite intense. So the plant is stressed out. So if you grow like mustard and you have no fertilizer in it, it's going to be often, if it's let's say a red mustard, it's going to be more red. And then it's also going to be much smaller. So the plant is stressed out, which does increase some phytonutrients, but at the expense of pretty much everything else. So all the minerals, vitamins, potential antioxidants will be lower, some of them, and then some will be higher. But the net, it's, in my opinion, it's a net negative in terms of total nutrition. And then so it'll give a stronger flavor potentially. And then as you increase fertilizer, it'll have a more mild flavor. It'll generally get crunchier and be a much more pleasant product to consume. And then certain things like, sunflower, as an example, the seed can influence the taste. But generally speaking, the fertilizer makes a big impact. And I found that even some organic fertilizers or compost can impact the flavor and not always in the best way. So sometimes they can have if you use coconut coir, often your crop will have more of a salty taste to it. Because coconut coir is generally speaking grown near the ocean, and a lot of the product that you buy is not thoroughly washed. So there are coconut coirs that are washed, but they're a lot more expensive. So you're going to have different flavor profiles based on the soil. So in my experience, Gaia Green 444 added to your soil, some sort of peat-based soil, which is very clean usually, is going to be the best bang for buck in terms of impacting taste positively and improving nutrition positively. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Microgreens Mastery Podcast. To access a wealth of insights, just click the subscribe button, stay notified about each new episode, and enjoy all of this wisdom for free. If you're ready to supercharge your microgreens business, visit microgreensconsulting.com for a gold mine of guides and resources. We've transformed thousands of microgreens businesses, and you're invited to join the success story. Let's stay connected. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Microgreens Consulting for exclusive content and expert tips and wisdom. If you found this episode insightful, please leave us a review, spread the word, and let's share microgreens magic with the world. Until next time, let curiosity fuel your growth and may happiness be your harvest. Happy growing, everyone.